what are the key issues we should be paying attention to as we watch this US-China relationship. And I would say focus on 3 T's. The first T is tariffs. And the reason is that that's the current war that is going on, as you know. And as you know, President Trump tried to raise the tariffs, China counter-retaliated, and US brought the tariffs down. So on the tariff front, right now there's a ceasefire. But as you have seen over the past year, tariffs is President Trump's favorite weapon. If he doesn't like what Canada's Prime Minister says, I'm going to increase your tariffs 100%. He doesn't like what President Macron says, I'm going to give a 200% tariffs on French champagne, right? He loves tariffs. And for reasons that are very hard to understand. And I can tell you, I used to know someone who was the CEO of Goldman Sachs. And he was the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors for President Trump in the first term. And this gentleman tried to explain to President Trump that tariffs are actually not good. Tariffs don't hurt the country that is exporting. Tariffs will hurt the American consumer. And economic theory is right, it does hurt the consumers. So he spent 3 hours explaining to him. So at the end of the discussion, it was very clear President Trump wasn't convinced. So this gentleman asked President Trump, so why do you like tariffs so much? And President Trump replied, I love tariffs. It's true. I'm not exaggerating. He just loves them. He sees them as a weapon that he has, and he can apply them to anybody, and which he has, as you know. And most countries, in one way or another, they got to accept it. They have no choice. They can't fight the United States. Only one country, by the way, has successfully retaliated against United States, and that is China. Everybody else, including the Europeans, have accepted the tariffs, right? That shows you the power of the weapon. That's why you've got to watch the tariff dimension. The second T is technology. And I can tell you, the real battle will actually be fought on the technological front. And here I'll be very cautious, because as you all know, I studied something very practical in NUS, something called philosophy. Very useful. It didn't give me much insights into technology. So I cannot talk to you intelligently about the technological dimension, and especially about the latest incarnation of the technological dimension, which is the AI struggle. And what is happening in the AI field is absolutely amazing. And here too, if I can mention another unpredictable element, again, if you had asked me, I don't know, whenever, 2 years ago, after, US produced ChatGPT and all, when will China catch up? I would say 5 or 10 years maybe before China can catch up with ChatGPT. Boom, within 1 year, DeepSeek came along. It was a big surprise. So it shows you that in the technology dimension, both sides are incredibly powerful. In fact, at the same time, I can tell you about a year and a half ago, I published an article in the magazine Foreign Policy in Washington, D.C., together with a former president of Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, Tony Chan, and an American, saying all efforts to stop China's technological development have failed. An example is, the Soviet Union refused to give nuclear bombs to China. China said, no problem. They developed nuclear bombs on their own. So, therefore, the technological dimension will be a very important dimension of this struggle, but no one can tell you who's going to win. Because whatever you do, in my argument, I've always said, don't underestimate China. But whatever you do, please don't underestimate the United States of America. The United States is a remarkable country, truly remarkable country. And its capacity for innovation is absolutely amazing. And I can tell you, when I speak to the Chinese, they don't take the United States for granted. They know that they're dealing with a formidable competitor, certainly in technology. And finally, the third T is Taiwan. Why Taiwan? Because there's frankly only one issue that could bring the United States and China into a direct conflict, a direct war, and that is Taiwan. Because from the Chinese point of view, Taiwan is not negotiable. Not negotiable. It's the last living symbol of the century of humiliation that China suffered, as you know, from 1842 to 1949. As you know, China lost Taiwan after it lost the Sino-Japanese War in 1895. And from China's point of view, getting Taiwan back to China is non-negotiable. It has to happen. And but at the same time, the good news is the Chinese are prepared to be patient. They're not going to rush it. They believe time is on their side. They don't have to rush it. But if Taiwan declares independence, it is 100% certain that China will declare war. And since the United States has self-created an obligation to defend Taiwan, as you know, the US Congress has passed something called the Taiwan Relations Act. Even though it doesn't explicitly say the US has to defend Taiwan, if the war starts within China and Taiwan, the US will be under tremendous pressure to intervene. And if it intervenes, this will mean a direct war between US and China. So therefore, it's important for both sides to understand how important the Taiwan issue is and why you have to manage it very, very carefully. And here, fortunately, the remarkable thing is that even Joe Biden was a much nicer guy. He didn't understand how sensitive the Taiwan issue was. And he unwisely said not once, not twice, not thrice, but 4 times that the United States will defend Taiwan. This, by the way, erased the policy of strategic ambiguity that the United States had created, saying, hey, we will not declare that we will either defend or not defend Taiwan. We want the Chinese to keep the Chinese guessing, right? And that way the United States may not feel obliged to defend Taiwan if a war breaks out. That was the reason for strategic ambiguity. But that policy of strategic ambiguity was thrown away by Joe Biden. But fortunately, Donald Trump has brought it back. And so on the Taiwan issue, surprisingly, things will probably be calmer under Donald Trump than it would have been if Joe Biden had been re-elected. So that's an issue for which we should be grateful that Trump is around at this time. So I hope by now I've given you some sense of the complexity of this contest. And I've given you just a few layers, but there are more and more layers as you examine each issue in depth. And I hope that this is...
China today is the one that's trying to push for multilateralism, but America is the very one that's trying to destroy and whatever that has been put in place over the past 80 years.
Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, that's another... well, in some ways it's not surprising because President Trump was always suspicious of multilateral organizations. He had actually withdrawn from the World Health Organization and UNESCO in his first term, and he's withdrawn again in his second term. But the question is, in the case of the United States, President Trump, I think, will be president for 3 more years. And the likelihood is that whoever succeeds him will probably go back to the policy of sticking to the 1945 rules-based framework, because it has worked in American interest to support that framework. There's a reason why the United States actually was a supporter of it for 80 years. And only President Trump, in some ways, backed away from parts of it. So the likelihood is that things could go back, when at the end of President Trump's term. But I also want to reinforce a point you made, that one of the points that the United States makes about China is the word you use. China is a revisionist power. China wants to overthrow the 1945 rules-based order. Actually, the Chinese have no desire to overthrow the 1945 rules-based order, because the China today is the most successful China you have seen in 4,000 years of Chinese history. Never before has China been as powerful as it is today. The amount of power that China has is the highest it's ever had, And how did it become so successful? Because it plunged into globalization and it functioned by the rules-based order. So today, China is the one trying to defend the World Trade Organization, and it's the United States that's trying to undermine the World Trade Organization, which is a paradox, because the United States set up the World Trade Organization. And that's a paradoxical situation we are in. But I would say that don't write off the 1945 rules-based order yet, because as you know, one English word that has become very famous in the last week is a word called rupture. I'm sure you've all heard that the Canadian Prime Minister gave a speech in Davos a week ago in which he said that there has been a rupture with the old global system. But he was only half right. There has been rupture and there has been resilience. And why do I say there's been resilience? In the past, when the United States took the lead on something, whatever, other countries will follow, say, hey, US does it, we must follow. Obviously, the US has calculated everything properly, correctly. But what's interesting is that there are 193 countries in the world. Out of the 193 countries in the world, only one country has raised tariffs, United States. 192 countries have refused to do so. So 192 countries are sticking to the system. So the global system, therefore, has shown resilience, and global trade should have gone down in 2025. It went up, surprisingly. So it shows you there's a resilience in the global system that we underestimate. The danger of that phrase, spheres of influence, is that it's very easy to use, but it doesn't capture the complexity. And the United States has a lot of vested interests in East Asia, in many ways. United States has invested more in ASEAN than in China, Japan, South Korea, India combined. Okay? So United States has got strong interest in Southeast Asia. So United States is not going to give up these areas, And they can try to carve out spheres of influence, but there'll be overlapping interests. And so when you mention, for example, they have, some people say there's a new Monroe Doctrine, which means that the Monroe Doctrine of the United States dominating South America. But United States militarily is dominant in South America, but all the South American states do more trade with China than they do with the United States. And they're not going to stop trading, including his good friend Milei of Argentina. So the phrase spheres of influence doesn't capture the complexity of our current world order.
The reason why I ask this question is actually when I go online and look at various reports about what's happening around the world, then I look at the commentaries, I find that one common feature is people commenting that China is weak, not doing enough, talking too much only. Right, so the question is, should China be more assertive? Especially when US appear to be now leaving various international organizations. Should China go in and try to lead? Right, like UN, will it function effectively with US breaking all the UN rules actually in a way, right? WHO, like you say, US have left. The other thing is China also, to me, had to look after its own interests by being more assertive, right? Like when there's a breaking of international law, like in Venezuela, actually China has investment in Venezuela, right? And there are rumors, I don't know whether it's true or not, that even Chinese tanker taking oil away, right, from Venezuela got seized by US. I don't know how true it is. And what is China's reaction? Right, so far we see that China basically they just respond verbally.
So Prof, we can keep the question short. So a long queue behind.
Okay, the last part is even China looking after its own interests back home, like in Taiwan. Now, US have a package of 1.1 billion military equipment to Taiwan. Should China be stronger and try to force the thing not to go through? Because once Taiwan is armed more and more, it's actually very difficult for China to deal with Taiwan in case the red line is crossed. Right?
So we let Prof answer. Yeah.
Okay, I think there are two big questions. One is, should China be more assertive? And second, how should Taiwan be managed? Okay. And the question of China being more assertive, China's influence in the world has grown by leaps and bounds. And you see, the thing is that in Singapore, you read only the Anglo-Saxon media, right? And the Anglo-Saxon media gives you a distorted perspective of what's happening in China. And to some extent, when the Straits Times publishes the Anglo-Saxon media articles, those articles also give a misleading view of what's happening. Chinese influence in the world has grown by leaps and bounds. And so, for example, I'll give you a concrete example. China has launched something called the Belt and Road Initiative more than 10 years ago. And when China launched the initiative, the United States saw it as a threat. And as you know, the Obama administration launched a global campaign to persuade countries not to join the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative. So out of 192 countries, some didn't join, clearly. You know, India didn't join, Australia didn't join. But 140 countries joined. So 140 out of 190 countries went against American objections and joined the Belt and Road Initiative. But this is just one example of China's influence. And today, if you look around the world and look at the world leaders, and you ask them what is their first preferred stop they want to go to when they become a leader, they want to go to China. And if you look at the number of world leaders going to China today, is much higher than the number of world leaders going to the United States. And so China's diplomatic influence has grown significantly. And they're slowly and steadily increasing their role in the world. That's not diminishing at all. Now on Taiwan, I think the Chinese are being very wise in keeping the temperature down as much as possible. But at the same time, they have to give a warning to the current president of Taiwan by organizing these military exercises that show that they can encircle Taiwan whenever they have to. So they have ways and means of conveying their message without necessarily having to be more assertive or aggressive on the Taiwan issue.
So I'd like to hear a comment from you. How much of these recent moves in, let's just say in the last 12 months, is personality driven by the sitting US president, and how much of this is calculated US foreign policy strategy?
That's a very difficult question. I mean, you're right. Personalities do make some difference, okay? And certainly, before President Trump, no US president would have threatened the takeover of Greenland. No US president would have threatened making Canada the 51st state of the United States. That's true. But don't forget that the United States has been intervening in other countries almost since World War II, right? Consistently. This goes back 60, 70 years. You mentioned Venezuela. Venezuela was a very small operation. Iraq they conquered the whole country. They send, I don't know, a few 100,000 troops. So that's a much bigger intervention. So US intervention in other countries, it goes back a long way. And it's an expression of their power. And even a nice guy like Obama would go around setting off revolutions, personally approving assassinations. I mean, if you look at this book, the last chapter, I talk about how unwise it was to carry out these policies of assassinations, you know. So this idea that the United States is only suddenly woken up to intervene in other countries is not true. It's a consistent pattern, but that's also a pattern that all great powers carry out. When you're powerful, you do what you must. And that's why they can get away with it.
I have a question on Taiwan. I think as recent as 2 days ago, the US published a paper on the national defense strategy saying that airlines should now take care of their own security. What is the implication of this on Taiwan? Does it mean US is giving up on Taiwan? Second question, what do you make out of the recent blistering speech by Trump at Davos? Was it deliberate? If so, what was he trying to achieve? And did he achieve what he wants?
You're referring to the Davos speech?
Yes.
Okay. The first question, one lesson I've learned after observing international relations for 55 years now, don't pay attention to words. Pay attention to deeds. So you can have a wonderful document, national defense strategy, forget it. It doesn't mean anything. It may be a signaling thing, but it doesn't indicate what they will do. So US will continue to try and defend Taiwan, regardless of what the words say. The deeds will be they'll do something. So don't pay too much attention to words. And similarly, in the speech that President Trump gave, I think one of the biggest mistakes we make, I mean, Trump is clearly unpredictable. That's a given, right? But some people think, oh, he must be crazy, irrational, you know. He's not. In his own way, he's very rational. Now, I gave some remarks about Trump. Let's see if I can find them. I have a little black book. Okay, I would say he's unpredictable, but he's also very rational and very shrewd. And these are 5 examples of how he can be rational, President Trump. Number 1, he knows when he has hit a wall. He doesn't bang his head against the wall. He walks away. So when he imposed the tariffs on China, it didn't work, he walked away. That's a rational thing to do. He knows how to be the center of attention. He makes sure that every morning when you wake up and have tea and coffee, the first thing you talk about is Donald Trump. That is not by accident. He knows how to seize your brain. He's very smart. And he does seize your brain. Number 3, he understands markets very well. So whatever he does, if it has any negative impact on markets, he makes sure that he backs away from it. So he has constraints. He's not irrational. And number 4, he can smell weakness. And when he sees weakness, he goes for the jugular. And that's why the Europeans were so stupid in practicing what an American writer calls strategic self-abasement. Strategic self-abasement means kowtow. The Europeans tried to kowtow in all kinds of positions, and they got kicked in the backside. So they can smell weakness. And the 5th thing, which is very important, he hates wars. He doesn't mind doing limited military operations like Venezuela, but he's not going to send a few 100,000 troops to fight in Iraq. He said publicly the Iraq war was a big disaster for the United States. Now, I tell you all this because, again, if you read the media, even our media, they give very simplistic analysis of these issues, you know, when these issues are much more complex. And so don't write off Donald Trump. You know, he obviously, is turning out to be one of the most consequential American presidents. And he's not stupid. And so don't write him off in the way that many in the media write him off.
I'd like to hear your views on President Xi's thoughts on this whole issue, on how he's managing it, because what I feel is that he comes across as very guarded, but yet he's slowly consolidating power on his home front and seems to be playing the long game. So I'd like to just hear your view. What is his position on this, and is he trying to get strategic advantage from this current situation? Thank you.
So your question is about what is President Xi's views of the current situation, right?
Yes, and perhaps what are his thoughts, and what are is he really playing the long game, because he seems to be consolidating power at home?
Well, I cannot step into President Xi's mind. I mean, I met him twice. I've shaken hands with him. He paid me the ultimate compliment. He says he's read my articles. I mean, you all never read my articles, but he has read. He has read my articles, yeah, you're right. It's not just President Xi. It's China. You see, there is a lot of geopolitical wisdom in Chinese thought. Going back to Sun Tzu and all that. And again, if you read this book, I cite Henry Kissinger about how China plays the game of Go rather than chess. You don't try to kill the king. You try to accumulate assets, and then you dominate the board. And that long-term strategy, China is carrying out. China is making sure that every country in the world, in one way or another, is dependent on China for some things. And therefore will not become hostile to China, and therefore will not join a containment policy against China. They worked this out a long time ago. So it's amazing how the Chinese are always looking down the road and anticipating developments and preparing. And they always have option A, option B, option C. They worked this out also, all in advance. So therefore, I'm confident that China will find ways and means of managing this contest. Which is why, by the way, I keep warning my American friends. I say, you completely underestimate China. And then when I say you underestimate China, everyone says, oh, you're pro-China. Actually, I'm pro-American. I'm warning the Americans, you're underestimating China.
And since last year, November, I noticed on the Chinese social media, there's a huge unhappiness and upset of majority of the Chinese netizens towards Singapore regarding the PM Lawrence Wong's remarks about the China-Japan conflict. Then, so my observation is that majority of the Chinese citizen or netizen, they already position Singapore as sider with US, as bias. So in that kind of social unhappiness and upsets, how do our Singapore to position ourselves and to build a more balanced image from both sides? Thank you.
Well, I mean, you're right. There was a social media storm in China in response to the remarks that PM Lawrence Wong made. But I think that's also partly because they misunderstood what he was trying to say. But the good news here is that the Chinese government did not say anything. I think the Chinese government is much more sophisticated. They understand where Singapore stands, and Singapore is definitely not. Singapore doesn't take sides between US and China, and Singapore is not going to take sides between China and Japan also. That's not our fight. We're not going to get involved in that. So that social media storm came and it went. But I think the Chinese government has a very sophisticated understanding of where Singapore stands because we've had constant dialogues and conversations with them. So from time to time, in any relationship, even with your wife, there'll be bumps on the road. But those bumps on the road are not going to affect your long-term relationship.
But I just worry that, in a lot of societies, the people's feelings will cause the leaders to react. Otherwise, they cannot answer to the general public's feelings.
Well, I think in the case of China, public opinion will not determine what the Chinese government does. The Chinese government is quite immune from public opinion.
Do you think a hot World War III is imminent? I use the word hot because I think some feels that we are already in the midst of a world war in terms of trade, and finances. Thank you.
Okay, that answer is quite easy to give. There'll be no World War III. And for a simple reason is that if there's a war between the United States and China, can you hear me with this echo? You can, yeah. If there is a war, it will quickly scale up to a nuclear war. And in a nuclear war, you don't have a winner and a loser. You have a loser and a loser. And both the United States and China, and indeed Russia, understand that in a nuclear war, it cannot be won. So they all understand where the red lines are that may cause a nuclear war, and they back away from it. And President Trump is particularly frightened of nuclear wars. And he's one of the few presidents who speaks out against nuclear weapons. So I'm not worried about World War III. But there'll be proxy wars. And proxy wars can be very destructive. But the Americans won't die, Chinese won't die, but some other people may die in the process.
So in recent years, we have seen the emerging partnerships, or rather strategic partnerships that China has made, particularly with the Soviet Union and the rest of the world. Do you foresee that it will, or she will, overtake the role that America has?
Or will China overtake the role that the United States plays in the world today?
Yes, that's right.
As China's influence grows, it will definitely grow. China's influence will grow. So in that sense, up to now, United States has been able to dominate the global multilateral institutions and control them in many, many different ways, if you read my book, The Great Convergence, I tell a story about how when I was ambassador to the UN Security Council, we would begin our meetings with a report given to us by the Secretary General. And I thought the report is written by the Secretary General. But I happened to be in a car with an American diplomat. This American diplomat got a call. And this American diplomat was talking to someone whom I knew, saying, in the report tomorrow, please remove paragraphs 5 and 6 and change paragraph 3 and add this in paragraph 8, giving precise instructions. Now, in theory, that report came from UN Secretary General. In practice, it came from Washington, D.C. So when you have a lot of power, you control things. So it's quite natural when China becomes more powerful, it will also control things. Because geopolitics is a very cruel business. It has no room for nice people. Okay? You have to understand it's a brutal game. And no country is nice. Every country will put its interests first. And as China becomes more powerful, it will become more assertive. This is a given. You cannot change it. That's the logic of history. So you have to get ready for the new world.
Will language be a barrier?
No, absolutely not. And by the way, Chinese diplomats today speak very good English.
My question is that amidst the trade dependency that China has on Russia, and both rumors and facts about Russia's military sponsorship in terms of equipment, arms, and technology towards Chinese, basically that sector, how does Russia actually fit into this US-China relationship? And is it operating as a hidden entity that we should be concerned of?
So is it about Russia? Oh, your question is about Russia.
Yeah.
Where Russia stands in all this.
Yes.
Well, I think the tragedy about Russia is that the Ukraine war could have been prevented. The Ukraine war was completely unnecessary. And frankly, now that he's died, I can tell you, Henry Kissinger told me that the war was a result of European geopolitical incompetence. I can understand why United States wants to push NATO, right? Why are you Europeans so stupid? Russia is going to be your neighbor for the next 1,000 years. Why you want to slap Russia in the face? So the Europeans were so stupid in slapping the Russians in the face, and they gave Russia no choice but to retaliate. And I think that's why, the president of Brazil has said, why are you only blaming Russia for the Ukraine war? Europeans, you should blame Europeans also. Right. So we, again, in Singapore, we get the Anglo-Saxon media. So we succumb to the Anglo-Saxon view where it's only Russia is evil, Ukraine is innocent, Europeans are good guys. That's rubbish. In geopolitics, there are no nice guys, right? So Russia was just doing what it thought it had to do to defend its interests. And that war could have been avoided. But now that Russia has got into the war, Russia is now clearly needs China's help in a big way. And that's why Russia and China will get closer and closer. And it's also not in China's interest to see Russia collapse. Because if Russia collapses, all the pressure goes to China. So therefore, it's in China's interest to make sure Russia continues. So that's the relationship between the two of them.
And should we be wary of post-Xi China?
I didn't get
Post-Xi China.
Oh, post-Xi China.
Is he creating a...
it's not going to happen anytime soon. I mean, in the Anglo-Saxon media, they say leaders should have term limits. And if you have a leader who stays for 5 years, 10 years is good. If a leader stays too long, it's bad. Now, let me ask you all a simple question. How long was Mr. Lee Kuan Yew influential in Singapore? How many years? What's your rough guess? He was Prime Minister for 31 years. And then Senior Minister, 14 years. And then Minister Mentor, I don't know how many years. 5 years, 10 years, add it up. So countries, if they have a good, strong leader, can benefit from it. Of course, if you have a bad leader, you'll suffer a lot too, definitely. But Singapore benefited a lot from continuity of leadership. But it's the Anglo-Saxon media that's trying to tell Xi Jinping, get out, because maybe he's doing too good a job. And that's why they're anti-Xi. But this idea that, we anti-him, no more questions. We agreed that, sorry. So I would say President Xi will be around for a while. And don't believe what the Anglo-Saxon media says.